What is going on, friends and fellow artists? This is Matt, aka Mr.E in 3D. And guys, in today's video, we are going to be completing our character art project where I have been attempting to recreate a book-accurate version of Gandalf the Gray from Lord of the Rings. Now, before I jump into Blender, I wanted to really quick go back over the description in the book, and from there, we'll jump into Blender and we'll get started. This is the way that Tolkien describes him. He wore a tall, pointed blue hat, a long gray cloak, and a silver scarf. He had a long white beard and bushy eyebrows that stuck out beyond the brim of his hat. That's not too much to go on, and a lot of that revolves around colors. Colors aren't going to matter to us too much, at least at this point, because while we're designing him, it's all in one color. It will matter once I start painting him, though, and that's where you're going to see some of the bigger differences from the film version. I am super excited to get his done. I'm going to jump into Blender, I'm going to build out his body, I'm going to pose him, and then I'll come back out to the camera and show you guys the final printed product. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright, starting out with one of the generic bodies I created in a previous video, I will begin the process by first moving his head and beard out of the way, and then I will go to the body and add a couple loop cuts with Ctrl R and define where the front of his cloak and his sleeves should be. Now with those lines defined, I will select all of the faces of the cloak. I will hit E to extrude them out, click off, and then hit S to scale them out in 3 dimensions. So that I can create the rest of the cloak, I will grab the bottom half of the jacket, pull it out a little bit, rotate it using R, and then select the bottom faces of the cloak and hit E to extrude them down and around to his boots. Now, I want to refrain from adding too many wrinkles or folds to his cloak at this point in the process. My plan is to have these details created with each unique pose of the character that I make down the road. So for this part, I will leave it alone, but once I get to the posing process, you will see me add folds and more detail to his robes. Now it's time to create his boots. At the pant line, I will click Ctrl R for a couple of defining loop cuts and then scale them out to create the line where his pants meet his boots. I will also create a couple loop cuts at the base of his boots to define the soles of his shoes and then round them out to give them that nice boot-like shape. Now, considering his beard is so long, we really aren't going to see much of the top part of his robes beneath the cloak, but I add a little bit of detail just to define an actual shirt line in the off chance that you would see it in a future build. I'm going to create the bottom of his robes with a cylinder that I will eventually hollow out and extrude back into 3 dimensions. Now, just like the cloak, I'm going to refrain from adding too many creases or folds so that those are unique to each of my posed figures down the road. I'm going to pull the head back down into position and do some final scaling and a little bit of extra detailing to the cloak before moving on to the next phase of the process. Now it's time to add one of the features from the original book left out of the film adaptations, Gandalf's silver scarf. I'll start by adding a plane to the environment, and I use the K for knife utility to simply draw out the shape I want, delete the extra faces, and use the R to rotate and G to grab and wrap this scarf around his shoulders. Once shaped, I will extrude a long section of the scarf down the back and the front. I'll then select the entire model and hit E to extrude it into 3 dimensions. To help identify this as a scarf, I will add a fringe to the front and the back at the end by first adding a knife cut along the last faces and then add a few loop cuts. I will grab every other line on that fringe and then I will pull it out and pull it forward with G. It's time to move on to one of my favorite parts of the build, creating his sword, Glamdring. Like most of my models, I will start out by shaping the cube, split it in half with Ctrl R, delete the left side, and then add a mirror modifier so that what is done to the right side of the build is done to the left. The name of the sword, Glamdring, means foe hammer in Elvish, and for my version, I thought it would be cool to play into that by making the pommel of the sword into the form of a hammerhead. While most of the sword is being extruded out of the initial cube, I will add a cylinder to create the guard. I will thin it out, shrink it down, and then extrude it over time and round it out into shape. I will then click it and then click the sword hilt, hit Ctrl J to combine them, and then we'll add a guard to the other side thanks to the mirror modifier that's already in place. For the leather grip of the sword, I will simply add a series of loop cuts and then select the faces of each section all the way around. I'll click E to extrude them, then I'll click S to scale them out, and then S along the Z to size them properly for the entire hilt. To finish up the sword, I've decided that I'm going to add an extra detail and create a rune using a plane and the knife technique. Now in the books, runes cover the guard that explain that Glamdring was made for Turgon, the king of Gondolin. Now there's no way I'm going to be able to translate all of that, and even if I could, it would never show up on the final print. So instead, I'm going to do one rune, an Elvish G for Glamdring, and I'm going to put it in the center of the guard. Now it's time for his staff. I'll do this first by adding a cylinder and then scaling it down and then scaling it along Z to create a long pole-like shape. Now again, Tolkien doesn't give us too much in the way of description, so I'm going to be interpreting this my own way. The key for me is to make it look uniform and try to balance it with the natural details that lead you to believe that this could be made from a branch of a tree. In my early concept sketches, I added these curving, uniform top branches around a crystal shape, and that is what I'm going for. But I really want them to be uniform, so I'm duplicating these out, and I'll actually wrap them around the top and form the rest of the staff off of this detail itself. With the curving branches in place, I now draw in angled lines and extrude out the rest of the staff in sections around those branches to make the entire model look more natural and uniform. After adding a subdivision, I now add a cube and shape that into the crystal by adding cross lines along the top and bottom and scaling out the two new center vertices along the Z. With that, our book-accurate model of Gandalf the Gray is now complete. From here, it's time to start the posing process and get him into our first printable model. Now, when it comes to posing the characters, it's a pretty self-explanatory process. I select faces and vertices, and I use R to rotate or G to grab details and move them where I want. Now, if you are new to the channel or you stumbled across this video and wondering why I'm not creating skeletons or weight painting Gandalf, it's because I cannot use skeleton posed models with my 3D printing software, and that is the primary goal of my channel, to create characters and props that I can eventually 3D print and display. As I stated earlier, this is really where adding folds and wrinkles to the clothing comes into play. Doing this at the posing process ensures the clothing looks natural when it's in its final position. When it's time to pose the head, I will start with his beard. I'll use relational editing to ensure that I get all of the vertices and faces as I move it into a flowing position. As I finish up Gandalf's facial details, most of you can probably already identify the moment of the novel I'm trying to capture with this model. And to me, that speaks volumes to how iconic this character actually is and how this moment resonated with all of us as we read it. Now that he has been posed, I will add a stand and his weapons, and we should be ready for a final review before I send him off to the printer. Now, typically I don't give titles to individual figures that I create, but this time around, I think I'm going to make an exception, and I am going to title him, You Cannot Pass. All right, guys, there you go. Gandalf is now complete. He has been fully modeled, he has been posed, and now he has been printed as well as painted. And this is the final result. I think he turned out awesome, and this is 100% the way I visualize him from the books. He's got his silver scarf, his blue hat, glamdrig, his staff, and he is staring down a Balrog. Now, one of the fun things about this project, and I shared this previously, is I did save a version of Gandalf in T-pose so that I can actually go back and create more poses and more printed figures whenever I'm ready. It's one of the great things I love about this process. You can just keep creating off of something you've already created, and you can just have a whole series of statues if you want. Guys, as always, I thank you all so much for the support that I'm seeing in the channel. Like, share, subscribe if you haven't, comment down below. Let me know a character from pop culture you would love to see me create. I appreciate y'all so much. Have a great day.